Welcome to School for Relationships. In my last video, we talked about what enmeshment is and why it matters. And this video is for those of you who like to dig deeper and want to understand where enmeshment comes from, particularly the family roots of enmeshment. And before we go there, I want to open with a disclaimer and acknowledge that I'm a white American therapist working with clients in the US. And these ideas can be helpful for people from other cultural backgrounds if they're modified to be more culturally appropriate. And this content is primarily geared towards an American or Western audience. The other thing I want to note is you'll hear me use the term parent throughout this video, but this information applies for any adult caregiver who took part in raising you. So as we seek to understand our parents' or our caregivers' approach to raising us, I also want to say I myself am not a parent and I'm not a parenting expert. I am just a therapist here to share research on the impacts of different parenting approaches, particularly with how parents set boundaries with their children. And every culture has their own norms around what is considered normal and appropriate parenting. And these cultural norms also shape the impacts that different parenting styles have on us as adults and can either exacerbate or protect us from negative impacts. So how our relationships affect us and what we consider normal in a relationship or family depends on our cultural context. In many cultures, enmeshed relationships have dominated as the status quo for generations before us. So as we reflect back on the mainstream norms for our families growing up, I hope we can look at the relationship skills that our families taught us or didn't teach us with compassion and understanding. By engaging with these ideas and building self-awareness, you're taking responsibility for what is within your control, which is how you show up in your relationships. And if you're a parent listening to this content, taking this time to reflect on your parenting style and seek out more information so you can better support your children is incredibly impactful. And please take or leave whatever feels useful for you, because every child is different and you know your child's needs better than anyone else. So as I've said, enmeshment is a learned pattern of relating to others, and we learn our relationship patterns from the people and culture around us. We learn how to engage in intimate relationships in large part based on our first experiences of intimacy with our family growing up. As we build self-awareness on where we struggle with setting boundaries, we can look back at how our families modeled setting boundaries with us as children. And the two most important types of boundaries in families are, number one, role boundaries, and number two, psychological or mental and emotional boundaries. Starting with role boundaries create clear expectations on how people participate in a relationship or in a family based on their role and level of authority or dependence. Role boundaries become blurry in a family when people over or under assume responsibility based on their level of authority and dependence. The classic example of this is when a child takes on responsibilities of their parent. Then we have emotional boundaries, which protect our right to our own thoughts and feelings in our families. And blurry emotional boundaries mean there can be a lack of differentiation. We can't tell the difference between the emotions of each family members. We may see this in families where there's an unstated expectation that caring about each other means you feel what I feel. In families with blurry emotional boundaries, family members may feel responsible for each other's emotions and also not be fully assuming responsibility over noticing, feeling, and managing their own emotions. So let's start by focusing in on role boundaries. The parent-child relationship is by nature a hierarchical relationship where parents hold greater responsibility for managing the well-being of the family, their own well-being, and also their children's well-being. And when we look at how parents assume or don't assume this higher level of responsibility, developmental psychologists have identified three main aspects that shape a parent's parenting style: their level of permissiveness, their behavioral control, and their psychological control over their children. Behavioral control, which is where we're going to start, involves maintaining firm role boundaries and keeping that authority within the family as a parent. This is called an authoritative parenting style. Authoritative parents set clear standards for how their children should behave according to their maturity level and guide their children towards learning more appropriate behavior. Rather than trying to psychologically control their children, authoritative parents support their children with learning how to express and manage a wide range of emotions. This parenting dynamic creates a family atmosphere of mutual respect between parents and their children, without this respect translating to the adults treating their children with the same expectations that they would for an adult or a friend. And growing up with authoritative parents gives children a level of support and structure that's helpful for developing a positive sense of self and healthy relationship skills. Studies show that children of authoritative parents tend to be more confident and assertive, more willing to explore and take meaningful risks, high achievers academically and professionally, and to experience high levels of life satisfaction. On the part of parents, an authoritative parenting approach requires a high level of emotional maturity, skillfulness, and access to helpful resources and information. If we contrast this with permissive parenting, permissive parents struggle with setting firm and consistent boundaries that guide their children's behavior and often have blurry or role boundaries. And permissive parenting can come from a place of parents being indulgent or neglectful of their children. Permissive indulgent parents are emotionally responsive and warm with their children and set lax rules and boundaries. They may treat their child with similar expectations as they would for an adult or a friend, allow their children to make their own decisions, and have a hard time saying no. Children of permissive indulgent parents may not learn self-control or how to manage negative emotions like anger. They tend to be more impulsive and aggressive and may struggle with finding a sense of direction in life and trusting themselves to try new things and overcome challenges. Children of permissive neglectful parents struggle with similar issues and the impacts of experiencing neglect. Children who are growing up with an emotionally or physically unavailable and inconsistent parent may struggle to develop a positive sense of themselves due to a fear of being unwanted or not good enough. Depending on that child's developmental stage, that child may not be able to understand yet that their parents' absence or neglect is not about them or their worth or lovability. And unconsciously blaming ourselves for our parents' absence and neglect actually restores a sense of control to us as children, because it's giving us this hope that striving to be better will make our parents pay more attention, love us more, or stick around longer. In a consistent and nurturing home environment, children don't have to choose between feeling a sense of control and stability at home or developing a positive sense of themselves. So as we compare authoritative and permissive parenting, we can see how role boundaries protect and maintain parents' authority over their children and the well-being of their family. Role boundaries protect children's ability to remain children and to play, explore, and focus on themselves and understanding who they are and how they feel. With weak role boundaries, children can end up taking on adult responsibilities before they're ready. Some of the most common forms of this are parentification, when a parent treats a child as a substitute friend or partner, and triangulation, when a child is roped into their parent's relationship to diffuse tension between them. Parentification in particular is very common and can produce a whole range of effects on children's well-being. And we have two main ways this shows up. There's instrumental parentification, when a child takes on physical tasks and responsibilities for the household. And then we have emotional parentification, when a child takes on an emotional caregiving role for their family and is helping their family or parents emotionally regulate, mediate and reduce conflict, and problem solve. Studies indicate that instrumental parentification is generally, but not always, the least harmful of the two types, particularly when those parents still recognize the responsibility that their child has taken on and remain emotionally responsive to their child and their child's needs and feelings. So parentification can build resilience and lead to some positive outcomes for children later in life, if that child is still receiving emotional support, has other supportive relationships with other adults or extended family, and is being recognized and validated for their caregiving efforts. When a parentified child has to prioritize the needs and emotions of their family or parents over their own, without this being recognized or reciprocated, this child may struggle to develop a clear, positive, and separate sense of themselves. And some of the long-term negative impacts of parentification without recognition or support include lower academic achievement, under and unemployment, coping through internalizing problems and self-blame, lower self-esteem, higher levels of depression, and disrupted development of healthy relationship skills, which can lead to more overfunctioning, caretaking, and people-pleasing tendencies into adulthood. So as we can see with parentification, blurry role boundaries often, but not always, point to blurry emotional boundaries. Emotional boundaries are what help parents manage their own emotions so they can be aware of and responsive to their children's feelings. This responsiveness to a child's needs and feelings is called attunement. And attunement is one of the most important factors in children's well-being and development of a positive sense of self. An attuned parent is first of all meeting their child's basic needs, and more than that, they're noticing how their child responds to certain stimuli, what their child likes and doesn't like, and respects their child's natural rhythms. An attuned parent gives their child the space to have their own feelings and preferences, while also supporting them in understanding and managing these feelings. This support can include helping children label and describe how they're feeling, validate these feelings, and providing options for how that child can manage their feelings and eventually feel better. When a parent names their own emotions without making their child feel responsible, or tells stories that show other people dealing with similar emotions, this builds empathy for that child and creates safety because they know that there's nothing wrong with them for the way they're feeling. So attunement creates an experience growing up where we get to feel understood, felt, and accepted by our parents. This doesn't mean that our parents have to get it right and know what we're feeling or how to respond all of the time. Research shows that even attuning to what a child feels and prefers 1/3 of the time is enough to create secure attachment, which is what developmental psychologists call good enough parenting. This consistent effort to attune and try to attune to our children starts with a dedication to getting to know each child as their own person with their own needs, feelings, and preferences. Seeing a child as a separate and unique individual requires strong emotional boundaries that start with the parent assuming responsibility for noticing, feeling, and managing their own emotions. The amount of skillfulness that goes into maintaining emotional boundaries makes it easy to see why so many parents struggle with this if they were never taught these skills themselves. And when we have a parent who isn't consciously aware of their feelings, even their very young children may be more intuitively aware of what their parent is feeling than the parent themselves. Children are so perceptive and pick up on a lot, especially nonverbal cues. So as a child, if we have this difference between how our parents say they feel compared to what their body language, facial expression, and tone of voice indicates, this can create an incongruity that can be deeply unsettling for us as children. At that point, we don't know what to trust. Do we trust ourselves and our own emotional perception of our parents? Or do we trust our parent who is saying things that don't feel true, but is the authority in the relationship? Wrestling with this uncertainty around who or what to trust is where a child can start to develop blurry emotional boundaries, because that child may feel like they need to pay more attention to understanding what their parent is feeling than noticing and honoring their own emotions. A similar internal conflict can happen with children of parents who don't know how to feel or express certain emotions. And we see some parents who struggle with never being taught how to openly express positive and joyful emotions. And we see other parents who may struggle with feeling and expressing painful emotions like sadness and anger. And these parents may try to avoid these feelings as much as possible, keep them hidden, and may eventually explode with the strength of these emotions. A parent who struggles to feel and express a certain emotion unconsciously signals to their child that this emotion is not safe or valid to feel. So that parent repressing a certain emotion can lead us as children to develop this sense of hypervigilance and threat. We may unconsciously feel like we need to monitor the emotions of our parents and our family, so we're prepared if any of these unsafe emotions come up. And this constant monitoring of how other people in our family feel takes us as children away from noticing and learning how we feel. We may then also judge ourselves as children really harshly when we feel that taboo or avoided emotion. And lastly, when we see a parent who doesn't have the skills to manage certain emotions, this can leave children feeling like it's their job to manage their parents' emotions for them or to try to make them feel better as a way of maintaining a safe and stable home environment. So in many families, emotional boundaries become blurry, not because of malintent on the part of the parent, but just because our parents may never have learned skills around how to notice, communicate, and manage their own emotions. We do also have some parents who intentionally blur or violate their children's emotional boundaries by attempting to psychologically control their children. And this corresponds with more of an authoritarian parenting style. And psychological control is when a parent attempts to intrude on the inner world of their children and control their children's emotions through consciously or unconsciously invoking feelings like guilt, shame, and fear. And authoritarian parenting can come from a more well-intentioned place if a parent has reached a point of exasperation and run out of other resources and tools to control their child. And authoritarian parenting can also be intentionally harmful and manipulative when a parent is purposefully causing their child to feel bad in order to feel better or more powerful. This can involve that parent gaslighting their children or making them question their reality, shaming their children for understandable thoughts and feelings, using guilt to manipulate their children, dismissing and mischaracterizing children's feelings, attacking their children's worth or character, withdrawing love and affection, and other hot and cold treatment. Without the buffer of other protective factors or relationships, psychological control has particularly harmful effects on children's mental health and sense of self. This can lead to a higher likelihood of that child later engaging in emotionally and physically abusive relationships. Growing up with psychologically controlling parents has also been shown to increase both externalizing and internalizing behaviors. Externalizing behaviors can lead someone to behave more aggressively, lose control over their anger, struggle with impulsivity, hyperactivity, and destructive behavior. Internalizing behavior is more self-destructive behavior and shows up as higher levels of anxiety and withdrawal, negative self-talk, difficulty enjoying play or pleasurable activities, a tendency to self-blame, which can show up as self-harm or other self-harming behavior like disordered eating patterns. Externalizing and internalizing behaviors can lead us to being either overly compliant and self-effacing in our relationships as adults or overly dominating, which decreases the quality of our relationships and can leave us feeling lonely and isolated even when we're around others. So with this, looking at all these different parenting styles, I want to bring back in some nuance and acknowledge that different caregivers may have very different parenting styles, and even one parent can fluctuate between these. If we were raised by a single parent, they also had to contend with higher levels of stress that may have limited their resources for parenting if they weren't connected to other forms of support or community. And we may also be listening to this as a child who was raised with no consistent adult caregiver in our lives. So looking at these parenting styles could mean looking at the influences of multiple adult figures who took care of us, or the influence of being raised under the guidance of an institution or organization. For each individual person, there are many different influences to take into account in order to understand how we operate in our relationships today. And no matter how we were raised, we have an incredible capacity to learn, heal, and build new skills at any stage in life. And this capacity to learn, heal, and grow is called resilience, which is our innate ability to adapt to and overcome even serious hardship and adversity. And one of the biggest factors that promotes resilience for children is, again, just having at least one relationship with a supportive adult figure, regardless of whether that person was related to us. This supportive relationship with an adult helps us experience what it's like to have an adult respond to our needs and guide us on how to manage our needs and feelings. Other protective experiences that increase our resilience can include overcoming challenges and trying new things, learning helpful coping tools, and feeling connected to culture, community, nature, or a sense of faith. In looking at how we build resilience, it's important to remember that not all stress is harmful. With support, overcoming manageable challenges is actually a form of positive stress that helps us grow and develop more self-trust and belief in our own capacity. Research shows that the resilience that we develop through even these small and mundane protective experiences can shield us from a lot of the negative effects of childhood stress and adversity that I named before. And resilience is something we also can continue to build throughout our lifetime. As an adult seeking to understand your parents, or as a parent seeking to build your self-awareness, you can use this information to identify what relationship and boundary skills you want to develop and to seek further support in practicing these skills. By engaging with this content, You are stepping up to learn more about yourself. You're taking accountability for yourself and your impact on others, and embodying what resilience looks like in action. In the next video, we will begin to talk more about how we heal from enmeshed relationships and develop our own sense of self by exploring a process called individuation. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and tune back in for my next video.